You will be my wife until midnight. I'm making a deal with you." A millionaire on a dare proposed this to a beggar asking for money outside his office, but after her words, the room fell silent. And before we continue, please let us know which country you are watching from. Enjoy listening. Alexander Voronov detested auctions. To be precise, he relished them when everything unfolded according to his grand design, when his name echoed louder than any other, when bids escalated at his whim, and when gazes of admiration and envy were fixed solely upon him. But today was different. He leaned against the bar, feigning an intense study of his cocktail's composition, yet his peripheral vision remained locked onto Marta. His Marta, or rather, his ex-Marta. She was seated at a table accompanied by some impeccably dressed fellow who, in judging by his self-satisfied smirk, clearly considered himself the grand prize. Marta, as if to spite him, looked absolutely stunning in her emerald gown, a dress Alexander himself had personally selected for her at one point. She laughed at something her companion had said, and that laughter grated on Alexander's ears. He winced. It was a blow to his ego, a particularly painful one. Marta, who had left him for some traveling financier from London, was now ostentatiously ignoring his presence. She hadn't even deigned to grant him a fleeting glance, as if he were invisible. And Alexander had never been invisible. He was the king of this city, a shaper of destinies, a billionaire whose word carried immense weight. And now he was being disregarded. His business partner, Kirill, approached him silently. "What? Can't tear your eyes away," he whispered with a smirk. Kirill always knew how to fan the flames at the opportune moment. Alexander shot him a searing look. "None of your business." "Oh, come on, Sasha. It's obvious. Marta really got to you, and she won't even look your way. Must sting, being ignored like that." Kirill deliberately drew out his words, relishing the situation. "I can have any woman I desire," Alexander retorted, feeling his blood boil. "Oh yeah? Prove it," Kirill countered, his eyes gleaming. "Prove you're still the same Alexander Voronov, the one everyone bows to. You seem to have lost some ground lately." Alexander clenched his fists. Kirill was playing with fire, but damn it, he was right. His reputation had indeed taken a hit recently. A few unsuccessful deals, an environmental scandal, and whispers had already begun that Voronov wasn't what he used to be. He needed something to catapult him back into the spotlight, something that would make everyone talk about him again. "And what do you suggest?" he asked, striving to maintain his composure. Kirill grinned slyly. "It's simple. Get married right now to anyone. The effect is what matters. Show up at the conference tomorrow with a new wife, and people will forget about Marta and her Englishman." Alexander frowned. It sounded insane. "Are you completely out of your mind? Marrying just anyone is absurd, but that's the whole point. Absurdity, shock value, scandal. People love that. And you know how to put on a show like no one else? Remember how you pulled off that factory deal? Everyone was shocked. But you wriggled out of it. Do it again. Show them who's in charge." Alexander pondered. There was logic in Kirill's words. The risk was considerable, of course, but the reward could be immense. He would once again be the lead story in the news. His name would resonate throughout the city, and Marta would realize what she had lost. "All right," he said, exhaling. "I agree, but if it all goes south, you'll pay for it." "Wouldn't have it any other way," Kirill replied, clapping him on the shoulder. "So, shall we go find you a bride tomorrow?" The next morning, they exited the office building. It was cool outside, and Alexander draped his jacket over his shoulders. He looked around. People were bustling about, engrossed in their daily routines. Someone was on the phone, someone was smoking, someone was waiting for a taxi. And then his gaze fell upon her. She was sitting right by the entrance to his office, on a piece of cardboard, her legs tucked beneath her. Her clothes were dirty and worn, her hair disheveled, and her eyes held a look of exhaustion and a certain resignation. She seemed utterly lost in this world of opulence and glamour. Alexander stopped. This was a sign. The perfect sign. "There she is," he said to Kirill, pointing at the girl. Kirill looked at her with surprise. "Are you serious? This beggar?" What's the difference? The effect is what matters, Alexander replied with a smirk. Let's go. He approached the girl and stopped in front of her. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with disbelief and disdain. Alexander hadn't expected to see contempt in the eyes of a homeless person. Hello, he said, trying to sound as casual as possible. How about becoming my wife until midnight? The girl remained silent, continuing to gaze at him with the same scorn. Alexander was beginning to doubt his plan. Maybe this was a foolish idea. Maybe Kirill really is insane. What do you want? The girl finally asked, her voice surprisingly calm and steady. I'm offering you a deal, Alexander replied. I'll pay you and you'll play the part of my wife at an event for just a few hours. What do you say? The girl continued to be silent, as if contemplating his offer. Alexander felt the tension mounting. He was not accustomed to waiting. And what would I have to do? She finally asked. Just be by my side, smile, and pretend you're happy with me. Nothing complicated, Alexander answered. And how much are you willing to pay? Alexander named a sum. It wasn't small, but to him it was negligible. The girl pondered again. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. It was a bitter, ironic smile. All right, she said. I agree, but I'll warn you. You won't forget this evening. Alexander chuckled. Lada accepted the offer with a surprising confidence that somewhat disarmed Alexander. He led her to his car, a black Maybach, which always made the right impression. Lada seemed unfazed by the luxury. She got in with a certain dignity, as if she did it every day. She remained silent the entire drive to the nearest beauty salon, gazing out the window at the fleeting city lights. At the salon, Alexander was expected. He had called ahead, warning them he was bringing an important guest. The stylist bustled about, offering champagne and fruit, but Lada declined everything. She simply took a seat and allowed them to work. Alexander watched her transformation with a strange feeling. The dirty, ragged woman sitting on the street was vanishing, replaced by a refined, elegant lady. They applied light makeup, emphasizing her expressive eyes and high cheekbones. Her tangled, dull hair gained a shine after a professional styling. The choice of dress became a separate challenge. Alexander reviewed dozens of options before settling on a simple yet exquisite black Valentino gown. It fit her figure perfectly, highlighting all her best features. High-heeled shoes and a diamond necklace completed the ensemble. When Lada emerged from the fitting room, Alexander froze. A completely different woman stood before him. A spark had appeared in her eyes, her posture straightened, and her movements exuded confidence. He couldn't tear his gaze away. "What do you think?" Lada asked, a slight smile playing on her lips. Alexander cleared his throat, trying to mask his bewilderment. "You are magnificent. Simply magnificent." The appointed time finally arrived. They left the salon and headed to the venue, a luxurious mansion in the city center owned by one of his business partners. As they approached the mansion, Alexander felt the tension intensifying. He glanced at Lada, seated beside him. She was calm and composed, as if heading to a routine social gathering. "Ready?" Alexander asked, attempting to conceal his nervousness. Lada met his gaze with her piercing eyes and smiled faintly. "I'm ready for anything." They stepped out of the car amidst a flurry of camera flashes. Journalists and photographers swarmed them, eager to capture every moment. Alexander took Lada's arm firmly and led her towards the mansion's entrance. The guests gathered at the event initially froze upon seeing them. Whispers rippled through the hall. Everyone wondered who this mysterious companion of Alexander Voronov was. Marta, standing with her new beau, cast a disdainful glance at Alexander and Lada. Her eyes conveyed contempt and amusement. Alexander felt his pride sting once more. He had to prove to her that she was mistaken, that he was still worth something. He led Lada to the center of the hall and introduced her to the guests. "Allow me to present my wife, Lada." The guests offered polite smiles and nods, but their eyes betrayed a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. They were eager to discover who this woman was, who dared to enter their exclusive circle. Lada maintained her composure with grace and poise. She answered questions with reserve and intelligence, demonstrating excellent knowledge of etiquette and social graces. Alexander was surprised. He had expected her to feel awkward and lost, but she carried herself with confidence and ease. Gradually, the guests began to show genuine interest in Voronov's enigmatic companion. They approached her, posed questions, and tried to learn more about her. Lada responded politely and discreetly, without revealing any personal details. She simply stated that she had recently married Alexander and was very happy. Alexander watched the unfolding scene with a peculiar sensation. He realized his plan was working. The public's attention was riveted on him, and he was once again the center of attraction. The host announced a brief intermission, and Alexander, seizing the moment, approached Lada. "You look stunning," he said, trying to sound casual. "Everyone is captivated." Lada smiled, but there was no warmth in her expression. "Glad to hear it. I hope I'm meeting your expectations." "More than," Alexander replied. "But what did you mean when you said I wouldn't forget this evening?" "Just a small warning," Lada replied evasively. "Don't worry, it will be interesting." Alexander frowned but had no time to respond. The music faded and the host reappeared on stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "we will now have the opportunity to hear a few words from Alexander Voronov's new companion, Jis, a lady who has captivated us with her beauty and mystery. Please join me in welcoming Lada." Alexander was taken aback. He hadn't planned for Lada to speak. He wanted her to simply be present, creating the illusion that he was in control. But Lada was already making her way to the stage, and he was powerless to intervene. She ascended the stage with the grace of a queen, took the microphone, and surveyed the room. Alexander noticed a firmness in her eyes that he hadn't seen before. Marta, seated in the front row with her escort, raised an eyebrow in surprise. Investors held their breath, awaiting her words. "Good evening," Lada began. Her voice was confident and steady. "I am grateful for the opportunity to be here today, and I'm grateful to Alexander for opening my eyes." The hall fell silent. Everyone waited for her to continue. A chill ran down Alexander's spine. "Many of you know Alexander as a successful businessman, a man who knows how to make money," Lada continued. "And that's true. He is indeed talented in that regard, but few know the price of that success." She paused, looking directly into Alexander's eyes, her gaze devoid of any sympathy. "We live in a world where money dictates everything, where power and wealth allow moral principles to be disregarded, where corruption flourishes and ordinary people suffer. And Alexander is a part of this system." Murmurs began to spread through the hall. Investors exchanged glances. Marta smiled, anticipating a scandal. Alexander stood, bewildered by the unfolding events. "I wasn't always the person you see before you now," Lada continued. "Once I was a professor, teaching at a university, believing in justice and honesty. But one day I encountered something that changed my life forever." She took a deep breath, gathering her resolve. "The company headed by Alexander was involved in a corrupt scheme. They illegally seized the land where my home stood and the homes of many others. We tried to fight back, but the entire system was against us. We were entangled in various fraudulent schemes, intimidated, bribed, threatened, and in the end, we lost everything." A deathly silence descended upon the hall. Everyone listened, holding their breath. Alexander felt the ground beneath him crumble. He hadn't known about this. He had never delved into the details of the deals. He simply signed the papers that were presented to him. "I was fired from the university," Lada continued. "I lost everything I had. I built everything myself. My parents passed away early, and I had to live on the streets to survive." She looked at Alexander with disdain. "And today, by chance or by fate, I stand here before you in a dress bought with money stolen from me and many others. And I want to tell you all, enough. Enough closing our eyes to what is happening around us. Enough remaining silent and allowing corruption to destroy our lives." Alexander stood as if struck by lightning. His ears rang. He tried to process what he had heard, to reconcile the image of the street woman he had cynically purchased with the image of the professor whose life he had inadvertently ruined. He watched as Lada concluded her speech. Her voice, despite a slight tremor, was firm and confident. Each word was a lash against his ego, his reputation, his empire. "The documents you signed back then, Mr. Voronov, cost me everything." These words echoed in his mind. He saw her walk away from the microphone, and in that moment he seemed to snap out of his stupor. Instinctively, he stepped forward, trying to stop her, to explain, to justify himself. But Lada didn't look at him. She moved through the crowd like a phantom, oblivious to everyone around her. He tried to push his way towards her, but he was blocked by journalists who descended upon him with questions. "Mr. Voronov, what can you say regarding this woman's accusations? Is it true that your company illegally seized land belonging to her and other residents? Did you know about her past? How do you comment on the drop in your company's stock prices?" He couldn't answer. Words lodged in his throat. He felt his face burn with shame and anger. Anger at himself, at Kirill, at Lada, but most of all, at himself. He watched Lada exit the hall. He tried to follow her, but a hand stopped him. It was Kirill. "Sasha, you can't leave now. We need to do something. Stocks are plummeting. Investors are calling. Everyone is panicking." "What does that matter now?" Alexander growled, pushing his hand away. "She ruined everything." "Not she, you," Kirill retorted sharply. "You got yourself into this. You thought it would be a fun game, and now you're paying the price." These words sobered him. Kirill was right. He was solely to blame for everything that had happened. He had created this situation himself, and now had to bear the consequences. He looked around the hall. The guests who had admired him moments before now looked at him with contempt and condemnation. Investors, who had been ready to pour millions into his projects just a short while ago, were hastily leaving the event. Marta, she looked at him with pity, which was worse than hatred. He pushed Kirill aside and ran out of the hall. He needed to find Lada, to talk to her, to try to explain, but she was gone. She had vanished, as if dissolved into the night city. Alexander got into his car and ordered the driver to take him to the office. He needed to do something, make a decision, salvage what he could. Suddenly his phone rang. It was his press secretary. "Alexander Sergeyevich, we urgently need to issue a denial. We need to say this is all a lie, that Lada Yakovleva is an imposter, that she's trying to blackmail you." Alexander remained silent. He couldn't bring himself to say it. He knew it would be a lie. He knew Lada was telling the truth. "No," he finally said. "No denials." "But Alexander Sergeyevich," I said, "no denials." He hung up the phone. He felt completely empty. He knew his life had changed forever. He knew he would have to pay for his mistakes. He looked at his watch. It was long past midnight. Lada was gone. She had fulfilled her mission. She had exposed him. She had exacted her revenge, and he couldn't blame her. Morning. The news was all about her. Lada Yakovleva, the former professor who spoke out. Her name, her story, her face. It all now belonged not just to her, but to the entire country. Television screens, computer monitors, social media feeds, all were filled with her image, her words, her truth. Alexander sat alone in his penthouse, surrounded by a silence he had never noticed before. The vast windows, which usually offered a view of the city's bustling life, now seemed lifeless, as if veiled in mist. His laptop and phones lay beside him, silent witnesses to his downfall, reflecting his own pale face in their dark screens. He silently watched the news, witnessing his carefully constructed world of years crumble to dust. He watched reports, read articles, scrolled through comments. Lada Yakovleva had become a symbol of the fight for justice, a symbol of protest against corruption, a symbol of hope for those who had lost everything. Her story, told with such power and dignity, had touched the hearts of millions. Alexander Voronov's name, on the contrary, had become synonymous with greed, immorality, and impunity. He saw politicians promising investigations, law enforcement agencies announcing inquiries, the former partners distancing themselves from him as if he were a leper. His company's stock continued to plummet, approaching zero. Banks froze accounts. Investors filed lawsuits. His seemingly unshakable empire was collapsing, burying everything he held dear beneath its debris. Suddenly he felt not only fear, but also a strange sense of relief. It was like a long suppressed abscess finally bursting. Painful, but accompanied by liberation. For the first time in a long while, he felt ashamed, truly ashamed. Not for losing money or reputation, but for causing pain to another person, for his thirst for power leading to the destruction of someone else's life. He remembered the day he signed the documents without looking, without understanding their substance. For him, it was just another deal, another opportunity to make money. He hadn't considered who would suffer, who would lose their home, their job, their life. He was too preoccupied with himself, too absorbed in his success. Now he understood that everything that had happened was deserved. He had received what he earned. Lada hadn't sought revenge on him. She had simply told the truth. She had seized the opportunity presented to her to make her voice heard by those who needed to listen, and her voice had been heard. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. He pictured Lada. Where was she now? What was she doing? He hoped she was safe, that she was no longer threatened. He hoped she could start a new life, free from pain and suffering. Alexander turned and looked at his laptop. He opened his email and began to write. It was a letter of confession, of apology, with a promise to do everything possible to help those who had been harmed by his actions. He knew this was just the first step. A long and difficult path lay ahead, but he was determined to see it through to the end. He had to prove to himself and to others that he could change, that he could become better. He sent the email and closed the laptop. He looked at the phones still lying silently on the table. He picked one up and dialed. "Connect me to the prosecutor's office," he said. There was no fear or despair in his voice, only determination. He was ready to take responsibility for his actions. He was ready to pay for his sins. Alexander understood that he had lost everything, but at the same time, he had gained something more, an understanding of what truly matters in life. And he realized that wealth and power were mere illusions, that true value lay in justice and honesty. He left the penthouse and headed for the exit. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he was ready for anything. He was ready for the fight. He was ready for redemption.